Welcome to the Talk Like a Leader podcast, where we explore the mindset, skill set, and habit set of leadership communication. Using these tips, techniques, and tactics, you'll be able to talk like a leader to build better relationships and get more done. Your host is Guy Harris, who has more than 20 years of combined professional and military experience in consulting, coaching, and training in areas like team and interaction dynamics, communication strategies and tactics, as well as emotional intelligence. Take it away, Guy.
Hi, this is Guy Harris. Welcome to Talk Like a Leader. This week's episode is titled, Make Leadership Communication a Habit. Or maybe you could say, think about your leadership communication habits. Might even be a better title. Now, before we get started, I'll let you know that I am recording in a bit of a strange situation today, in that I am now in the second day of having no power. I live in the upstate region of South Carolina, and yesterday, Tropical Storm Zeta came through. While it didn't cause extensive damage in terms of property damage, at least to my neighborhood or my friends, or really to my knowledge, anybody I know, or any extensive damage to homes or property in the Greenville, South Carolina area. There are probably some somewhere. There's just none that I know of. It did cause a lot of damage to the electrical power distribution system. And so thousands and thousands of people without power. And here I am without power, operating in a way that is not normal for me and recording in a way that is not typical for me. So I'm not using my normal recording setup. Don't have access to some of my normal editing tools, those kind of things. So if there are glitches and breathing sounds and things like that in this week's episode, I apologize in advance. Well, one of the things that happened for me during this power outage period is it made me intensely aware of my personal habits. And while it's something I probably have mentioned in this podcast before, this idea of the power of habit became so clear to me yesterday in an event that has played itself out a number of times in the now about 30 hours since we lost power. The number of times I've walked into a room and hit the light switch, knowing consciously that it wasn't going to turn the light, and yet subconsciously my body did it anyway. The power of habit overwhelmed and controlled my conscious thinking. I even had a few situations where I would walk into a room, and just before I walked into the room, I would remind myself the light switch isn't going to work. And then I would have this overwhelming urge to hit the switch, and in some cases I actually did. One time, there's a series of steps through our house that leads me to hit 3 light switches in relatively rapid succession as I go from one room into another. I hit one light switch, the light didn't go on. I turned it off and thought, well, that doesn't work. I took the next few steps to the next part of the house and hit the light switch in that place. And again, surprisingly, it didn't work. And I thought, again, that doesn't work. Then I stepped into the third space, and before I knew it, I'd hit that switch too. And what's the point of all this? The point is that habit is a very, very powerful driver and motivator for our behaviors. And particularly in the communication realm, it can either help or hurt us. And the habits are not necessarily good or bad inherently, although they may have good or bad impact in a particular situation. So my point today is not to criticize habit or lack of awareness of habit or anything like that. It's to draw attention to habit so that as you think about growing in your leadership communication skills, you can bring some attention to your particular communication habits and hopefully improve them. I'm going to share with you a story from when I was in the Navy. We learned this practice known as immediate actions, and the idea was to drill into us certain things we would do whenever particular indications happened in the engineering plant or in the submarine control panels or whatever we happened to be looking at the moment. If we saw certain indications that indicated a particular type of casualty or failure or equipment stoppage or something like that, we were trained to have somewhere in the 3 to 5 immediate steps range. We called them immediate actions. These are things that we practiced and drilled and drilled and drilled until we would do them automatically, really almost without thinking. And the idea was to have conditioned into our response when we saw certain indications things we would automatically do that would put the plant or the ship in a safe condition. And then we could slow down and look at our procedure manuals and things like that to figure out what do we do from here. An example of that is that, we would have this drill so that there's a sudden shutdown of a reactor plant. It's called a scram. And if that happens, you need to act quickly to make sure everything's safe. Well, the thing is that it's been something like 30 plus years since I stood watch on a Navy nuclear power plant. And I still remember those, at least the immediate actions. I don't remember all the indications. I don't remember all the little details of every little thing about running the power plant. I do remember some big picture stuff, and I remember these immediate actions. Reactor scram, throttleman shut the throttles, electrical operator shift the electric plant to normal half power lineup, starboard side, reactor operator shift main coolant pumps to slow speed. So it's just automatic. And if you woke me from a dead sleep and said, Guy, reactor scram, I might yell those words because I drilled on them and drilled on them and drilled on them. What's the point of that? So much of leadership communication, when it really matters, happens in high stress moments. They happen in a conflict situation. They happen in a meeting when there are several people present and you're trying to navigate a potentially difficult conversation between two or more team members. When you're dealing with change communication, or you're trying to drive towards a problem solution and people on your team disagree and you're trying to find the way to solve the problem. Or you have a coaching situation trying to help someone through a difficult challenge, either to get better results or to change their behaviors at work. There's some kind of emotionality in the conversation. So much leadership communication is wrapped up in these moments that our habits will often drive how we respond to those. A lot of what happens in these high stress, high emotional moments is that the automatic response comes out before the thoughtful response. Now, I'm not suggesting that's necessarily a bad thing. The thing I want to draw attention to today is maybe it's a good idea that you can be aware of your automatic responses. And if you find that your automatic responses are not helpful or ideal, think about how you can condition yourself to have different responses. And if you have responses that are good, then excellent, that's great. Then find a way to use those in preference to any bad ones you have. Because I'm confident we all have them. I have them. You probably have them. My wife has them. My work colleagues have them. Communication habits that are good, bad, and innocuous. And the thing is to pay attention to the good ones, do more of them, and pay attention to the bad ones and do less of them. Now, what I'll argue is that if you do more of the good ones, you'll probably automatically do less of the bad ones. And here are some things to think about. If you think about your communication patterns, I think about my communication patterns. We all have things that words we default to, phrases we default to, responses we default to in situations. Like, for example, there are two that I know about myself, and my family kids me about them, and they say, oh, here he comes. I will say things like, and the connotation is whether I agree or disagree, it's perceived as disagreeing. And so I have to be aware of that response, the response. Another response I have, because I often don't want to necessarily say no directly to people, I know that I drift into this kind of response. Well, actually, and then I'll redirect the conversation. Well, actually, rather than saying no. Well, the thing is, it becomes so much a part of how you communicate. My family knows this about me. They go, oh, Dad's about to disagree. So it's, being aware of the patterns we fall into. My dad uses the phrase in other words, almost to the point that it's a joke in our family. My wife uses the phrase phenomenal, almost to the point that it's a joke in our family. And she's aware of it. It's not a criticism. It's kind of a thing we joke about. Yeah, oh, yeah, that was phenomenal. And we can't find another word to talk about that. So there are these patterns that we fall into. Sometimes my wife says, well, the fact is, these are just phrases that we fall to, and you probably have them too. Basically, everybody has them. And what I'm going to do is encourage you to be aware of the phrases and responses you use so that you can be more intentional about them, particularly in high-stress moments. And what I would encourage you to do is practice the better responses that you've developed over time or that you learned through listening to this podcast or reading resources about communication skills or getting mentoring or coaching from a trusted advisor. Build on those positive skills and practice and practice and practice, especially in low-stress times, so that in high-stress times, your habit will take over and you'll do a better thing rather than a worse thing. Well, if you have a trusted friend or advisor, they can probably help you figure out the types of communication patterns you use that are either beneficial in high stress moments or potentially unsettling or damaging in high stress moments. You can have that conversation with a trusted friend in a nice, calm moment. Have them tell you, are there things you've noticed about me that I say or do that either help or hurt communication? Not in a judging, critical way. It's in a way that help me understand what I do so that I can do better. I got to say, honestly, a lot of what you're going to learn probably is going to come from high stress moments that go badly. That's certainly true in my life. So much of what I've learned about things that I do to make conversations go in a bad direction has come through conflict and difficult conversations that I had to reflect on later and consider what my contribution to it was. Now, in order to do this well, one thing you have to do is get comfortable with looking back at a conversation you had that maybe didn't turn out as well as you would like for it to, and not in a self-condemning, critical way to beat yourself up, but rather in a what can I learn from this so that I can do it better next time sort of way. Is there something I say habitually that tends to trigger people negatively, and can I find a better way to say it? Paying attention to how people respond to your words and your body language. The idea is to bring intentionality to your habits and be aware of them so you can be thinking about how to do them better. And there are all kinds of books about habit change. There's The Slight Edge, there's Atomic Habits, there's The Power of Habit. There are probably others that talk generically about habit formation. And if you're looking for a resource on how to change your habits, those are some great books to look at. So I'll say it again, The Slight Edge, Atomic Habits, and The Power of Habit all have great suggestions and tips for how to grow and improve your habits in general. And I like to suggest that you apply any of those ideas to your specific communication habits so that you can be aware of them and condition yourself in a better way. Like I said, I'm now in day 2 of having no power, and I am more aware now that flipping the switch on isn't going to work. And I am getting better at not reaching for the switch when I walk in the room now that I'm in day 2. And I still sometimes do it. It's sort of frustrating. I know at an intellectual level it doesn't work, and yet the power of habit takes over. And so that's my advice to you this week. Pay attention to, notice your communication habits. Find a mentor, friend, trusted advisor who can help you identify the communication habits you have that either help or hinder your leadership communication, and work to focus on intentionally applying the positive habits more than the negative habits so that when you get in a high stress situation, you will default to a safe response rather than to an inflammatory response. So you can condition yourself to respond in ways to build, encourage, and edify your team rather than to tear down, criticize, and confront your team, so that you can do things in a way that make you a more effective leadership communicator, even in high-stress situations. So for this week, there's my encouragement. Focus on your habits, pay attention to them, build more of the good ones, and hopefully by impact, you'll get less of the negative ones. If you'll do that, if you'll be very intentional about growing good communication habits all of the time, you can talk like a leader. This has been the Talk Like a Leader podcast. You can listen to this show every week wherever you get your podcast. If you haven't, be sure to subscribe so you never miss an episode. I'm Guy Harris, and thanks for listening.